So another one of Durkheim's big contributions is the idea of collective conscious, which is communal or collective beliefs of society. So people may have heard this term before, but really it's kind of what is the social cohesion kind of institutions within society that then give us kind of this bigger picture of how is it that we think the same and act the same way. Social facts are real and outside of the individual, so they can be observed. Society is held together by a couple different forms, and this is also going to be a hint, hint, different types of solidarity. The first is mechanical solidarity, and mechanical solidarity is people doing similar work. So again, in band level societies, everybody essentially did the same work. They gathered acorns, they hunted, and it didn't matter if you were male or female in a true egalitarian society. So they would have been held together by mechanical solidarity. That's doing the same or similar work, and sharing that kind of the similarity of that spending time, right, is essentially doing the same things. So you can value each other on the same level. Organic solidarity is when you accept that there are social differences, and I think that this is a good example would be things like organic solidarity might be in an office setting where you have a department assistant, you have managers, you have salespeople. All those people have different roles, so you're not going to have a mechanical solidarity because you're not doing the same work. But you might have organic solidarity because you recognize that without those other people in those roles, you wouldn't be able to function in your job. So that's essentially organic solidarity. America is organized in an organic solidarity way. Mechanical solidarity is much stronger and held together through different avenues. There's different types of solidarities. A lot of people have added on to this Durkheimian kind of idea. Somatic solidarity comes from Adrian Pine, which is sharing in bodily trauma and or experiences. So again, I think somatic solidarity would be like if you and your friend went and got a tattoo at the exact same time. That's basically you're sharing that kind of moment, and it has to do with the body. There's a few others. There's other people use pragmatic solidarity, which is kind of in practice of being with people, kind of helping each other out. So in practice, the one that I'm looking into more is temporal spatial. So spending time and space with individuals gives people the first blanket level of solidarity, right? Again, the more people spend time with each other, the more they are bonded and are solid together. The other term that you're definitely going to want to know is anime, and some people say it anomy, which is the idea of a disruption in the collective conscious, right? Which collective norms are weakened. Durkheim studied suicide, and Durkheim's the first to actually put forward that society is actually, when it's broken and not working for individuals, this is when we would see higher levels of suicide. And he would say that the society is experiencing anime, which is an illness, basically a societal illness, because it's creating this issue in individuals. All right, so conflict theory. Again, Karl Marx gives us some of these ideas around resource distribution, inequality, those kinds of things. And he really talks about the base and the superstructure of kind of the economic, who has the power, who doesn't. The economy determines what society will be like. So Marxist is very much considered what would be called a materialist, right? Looking at economy and energy as the determining factor of why we organize the way that we do. A couple terms: bourgeoisie are owners of means of production, so that would be your factory owner. The proletariat are your laborers or workers that are actually making the product. Marx actually coins the term capitalism, which means individuals own means of production, right? Which he's actually against. He actually thinks that workers, if they're considered individuals, should own the means of production. Again, capitalism, his critiques of capitalism are that it requires debt and also exploitation of labor. Exploitation of labor is also called surplus value of labor. So essentially, when people are making a profit, it's because they're not actually paying you your value of what you're doing or your work. So this is how they make profit: is they undervalue you as a labor source, pay you a wage that is lower than what they're going to charge the customers on the back end. Um, Conflict of classes creates more conflict, right? So essentially, the haves versus the have-nots. He gives us some other terms too, which are great. False consciousness is the idea or belief or ideology that aren't in the person's best interest. For instance, it may be that, and he thinks of this as at a materialistic level, right? So false consciousness might be that you really want some store to close down, right? But essentially, because you just don't like it, you think that it's exploitative or it's not good. And let's say that the store does close down. The problem is that now people all have to shop at the same store that you're shopping at. So now it's more crowded. Prices get jacked up. So it's not necessarily in your best interest to want those things, even though you think it might be, right? So it's a false consciousness. Class consciousness is the realization and acknowledgement of class, the class that individuals occupy. So it's the level of admitting what class, and in America we just kind of lump people, and we do subcategories, but upper class, middle class, lower class, and then kind of poverty. And again, there's different gradations within that, but really that's kind of understanding where you occupy and others occupy is an interesting one that we'll get into further as well. Alienation is basically that workers are alienated from the products they produce. So many times in factories and or places of work, we don't actually ever experience the end product, and nor could we actually afford to buy that end product. So that's a form of alienation. There's also another form of alienation that wage labor causes, which is the alienation from nature. Because you're outside of that, you're in a factory, you're not living on personal time, you're on work time. There's alienation from other workers where you might not actually see other workers doing the work. So there's a bunch of different levels of alienation, but it's really essentially you're disconnected from the occupation, and that occupation is causing disconnects in other parts of our lives. Symbolic interactionism, again, Max Weber gives us class, status, and power. We'll go further into that. Class was economically determined. Rationalization: society should be built on rational and logical principles, not morality and tradition. Rationalization is also really utilized by America when we get into the scientific management theories of kind of the late industrial age and progressive ages. And really, rationalization is just kind of a growth out of the age of enlightenment as well. The iron cage is that individuals are trapped by institutions and bureaucracy. And again, bureaucracy forms when government and or corporations create such a large apparatus of not only law, but also structural components of management, and that individuals don't have time to do other parts of the job that they used to, so they have to hire more people, and that's where the bureaucracy comes, right? Like, again, if you think the DMV people that are in the back kind of making copies, that's part of the bureaucracy. Like the people that aren't actually giving driving tests, we're moving into bureaucrats, really. But the iron cage is the idea that individuals get trapped within that structure, and also within institutions, right? So if we're looking at the state level capitalistic economic structure, Americans are definitely trapped into that system, right? Like it's very hard to go what we would say off the grid, self-sufficiency, those kinds of things. You really get integrated in. Max Weber writes the Protestant work ethic, or he writes about kind of the Calvinists believing that merit and hard work could get you into heaven, essentially. Some of the Calvinists break off. There's some versions that really believe in predestiny, so working as hard as you can. And there's this weird kind of amalgamation if you guys want to look into it. But Weber's theory is very interesting, and that is that the religious ideology is causing a cultural component that then allows a very hardworking American public to exist. And I would say that the Protestant work ethic, if I think it's called The Spirit of Capitalism, the Protestant work ethic, and if you read it, it's very compelling. Weber does a great job of kind of selling his ideas that this ideological component can also change culture to a level that then dictates how kind of economic systems or materialistic kind of needs are met through that process. And really, symbolic interactionism again is that looking at that individual connection to society. Social constructions of reality. Luckman looks at this specifically, this topic, looking at how is our reality actually formed? How do we construct that? Is through things like social interaction, and you can use kind of all three theories here to utilize, to add to the social construction. Institutionalization is the act of implanting a convention or norm into society. So again, I think that this has happened in our own society to a certain degree. When norms get changed or something new comes about, we get institutionalized, and that's a term that is used. And again, this can happen to individuals that are exposed to kind of new or total institutions like joining the military. This would obviously change your norms as well. The Thomas theorem is an interesting kind of philosophical way of getting to what it is that is reality, right? If men or humans define situations as real, they are real in their consequences, behavior determined by subjective view of reality. So essentially, they're real in that whatever happens in that situation makes it real, consequences included, right? And then your behavior kind of is determined by your own subjective view of reality, right? So individually, we all do this to some level, which is we interpret the world around us, we interpret society, we're trying to understand how to behave, but then our behavior kind of is also reintegrated into this almost internal dialectic around interacting with different people and or being involved in different situations. So it's kind of a good one that gets into that theoretical mode. Self-fulfilling prophecy is also super important. It's the idea of a false idea can become true if it's acted upon. And the example here is the bank run, right? Like when people do this thing where like, oh, the stock market's tanking. Well, it's only tanking because you believe that it's tanking. So then everybody takes their money out. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We'll use this term a lot. Role, status, and prestige. Role, so we talked about status already. We talked about ascribed being born into status. And we talked in achieved. Status is rights and privileges and responsibilities. So benefits one rank within society that grants an individual. For instance, the president has the highest level of status in the whole world. Role is acting upon those rights and privileges that one's status bestows. So if your parents bestow that you are the garbage taker outer, you have that status, but you do not have the role until you actually take out the trash. And again, there's also the level of, so the role set array is actually roles assigned to one status. So like a student, right? So the role set array would be taking notes and doing homework, and those kinds of things are associated with that role of status of student. Situational negotiation of identity is the idea that we all have different roles and we have different experiences in life. And depending on the situation that we're in, we usually kind of can flash back to that role and utilize that, right? And we do this a lot. When you're going to a job interview, you don't behave like you do around your friends because you have a different role with your friends. You behave kind of more in a respectful manner, maybe around older adults that you were exposed to in terms of your relatives, right? So situational negotiation is also something that will come up a lot, which is it's basically adaptation on a social level, but it has to do with our roles that we've had throughout life. Role strain. Your book talks about role strain in terms of like parenting. So being able to parent, but then also go to work. So you're strained by that role. You could also be role strained by work, right? Role conflict, one or more roles is contradictory, like the parent with a full-time job. So I use this as strain because you can have strain or stress around that, but there's also conflict because parenting is vitally important, but then work is also important for survival. Role performance, how a person expresses his or her role. And again, would be an outward expression that we could observe. And then looking glass self, which is we base our image on what we think other people see. So we imagine how we must appear to others, then react to this speculation. This is an interesting one where you like kind of are trying to judge. Middle schoolers are probably a good example of this as well. So Looking Glass Self is super interesting.